In a scenario where a young child is left alone at a nature sanctuary, a lion catches sight of the child weeping by the roadside. The formidable creature fixes its gaze on the small child, releasing a daunting growl and bolting in the direction of the distressed youngster. The subsequent events are startling. The massive lion, named Scout, approaches the child with increasing cries that echo throughout the isolated premises. The day had barely broken, with the vicinity deserted. Scout, the majestic lion, treads to and fro while the cool morning air brushes through his splendid mane. Abruptly, he halts, his eyes meeting the tear-filled gaze of the young lad. The kid's whisker-wet cheeks were flushed, swollen and glistening as he beheld the imposing lion with his tearful gaze. Elevating his head, the lion roared, unveiling his teeth in an intimidating grimace. The child had no escape route in the vacant dirt road. In a moment of intense dread, Scout roared once more, glaring at the child, his eyes flickering with displeasure. Scout had been a resident at the safari sanctuary ever since he was rescued by Ethan, a devoted park ranger when he was still a cub. Discarded by poachers, the helpless young cub was discovered nestled against his lifeless mother by Ethan. The cub was too prematurely separated from its mother, leading Ethan to care for the little lion, waking up at ungodly hours to tend to its needs. Having given his heart and soul to the sanctuary since he was just 16, Ethan was well aware of the significance of making Scout acquainted with other lions before he got too dependent on human interaction. The vast sanctuary housed numerous prides of lionesses, and Ethan was hopeful that Scout would be accepted by one of the experienced lioness mothers he saw around. As soon as the cub grew strong enough, he entrusted him into the vigilant care of a lioness, a caring mother of 3. Despite being a fiercely defensive mother, she was one of the most docile lionesses Ethan had ever crossed paths with. He hoped this mix would prove conducive for raising Scout. The park ranger's intuition was correct, and the lioness embraced Scout as her own. Ethan was overjoyed at this fruitful result, and over the succeeding years, he observed Scout grow into independence and eventually leave his pride. Adult male lions prefer solitude, and leaving their pride for the first time is always fraught with danger. There was the understanding that Scout stood a better chance at surviving within the sanctuary, but the risk of meeting a more dominant lion and consequently fighting over territory or mates was always present. Ethan had an incredible love for the lion prides in the sanctuary, but kept an extra watchful eye on Scout. The time the young park ranger had spent rescuing and nurturing the cub had developed a personal bond with the lion, christened Scout. However, the lion was soon to do something that would take the ranger by complete surprise. Despite his challenging start, Scout managed to fit in well in the reserve. His bravery, intimidating demeanor, and enormous size rapidly made him one of the most dominant males in the reserve. Ethan, the ranger, was aware that Scout had prevailed in several battles. It was raw, but it was natural. The animals on the reserve lived as they would in the wild, but with the added protection against poachers. A team of vets was on standby if needed. The survival of these animals was paramount due to their endangered status. Thus, Ethan occasionally worried about Scout, but knew that he was in the safest place possible. Even though the reserve did its best to shield the animals from poachers, there had recently been a few incidents with hunters breaching the boundaries of the reserve. No animals had been harmed thus far, but it became more crucial than ever to reinforce the borders of the reserve and deter the poachers. It was due to these porous boundaries that Scout would find himself confronted with an abandoned, distressed child. The lone lion rose from his sleep. The sun began to rise, and the lions were usually more active during the cooler parts of the day. Scout's tummy rumbled as a signal of hunger, and he stretched leisurely, indicating it was time for his hunt. Securing food while living solitary might be challenging, but Scout seemed to manage fine. The colossal lion got up and stretched once more, extending his huge paws. But then he paused abruptly, his attention drawn by an unusual sound and distinct scent carried by the wind. Following his instinct, Scout moved towards the source and found himself face to face with a crying child, left alone on the dirt road. Without a second thought, Scout began advancing towards the distressed boy. The child sat in the middle of the road, the hood of his blue jacket hiding his face. He appeared no older than 3, his tears flowing while he sobbed loudly. Scout maintained a safe distance but started to circle the boy, never letting him out of sight. The little boy's cries were sharp and harrowing, inducing a shift in Scout's behavior. He began pacing, displaying signs of confusion and conflict. Suddenly, he halted. A new scent had caught his attention. Scout sniffed, and his fur bristled in response. His gaze met the little boy's, whose cheeks were puffy from weeping. Scout issued a thunderous roar, exposing his teeth. The young child fell silent at the unexpected sound. Scout's eyes appeared filled with rage, but the child noticed the lion's attention wasn't on him. His stare was aimed over the boy's shoulder. Abruptly, Scout sped towards the child, soaring above his head. A jolting, pounding noise prompted the little boy to spin around. On the ground was another lion, pinned down by Scout, who towered over him, rumbling and striking with his massive claws. After a brief but fierce altercation, the second lion proved to be no match for Scout. Ethan, meanwhile, was making his way along the dirt path, oblivious of the unbelievable scene soon to unfold before him. The pinned-down lion struggled, trying to escape from Scout's punishing grip. The park ranger turned a corner, only to spot the 2 lions in combat. Although not an extraordinary sight in his line of work, the sight of the young boy a few yards from the fierce beasts made his stomach churn. He couldn't understand how a child had ended up in the reserve, but he recognized the danger. Without hesitating, Ethan pushed hard on the gas pedal, steering his jeep at top speed towards the young boy. The second lion managed to break free from under Scout and limped off. The larger lion roared and returned his attention to the child. Ethan had a deep affection for Scout. However, if Scout had hurt the boy, it would have spelled disaster for the reserve. The events that unfolded next nearly made Ethan lose control of his jeep. The mammoth lion settled down beside the young boy, forming a protective shield around him as he surveyed the terrain to make sure no other threats were present. What Ethan had just observed was not a duel between lions for sustenance. Scout was safeguarding the child. Scout had countered the other lion to spare the boy. Ethan reminisced about the day he discovered Scout whimpering against his mother's lifeless body. Perhaps Scout had identified something familiar in the sobbing child. Regardless of what triggered it, Ethan was in awe. He only hoped his judgment of Scout was sound because, even sheltered by the lion, the boy needed to be removed from the road to ascertain what had transpired. If Scout prevented him from helping the boy, Ethan was uncertain about what to do next. He switched off the engine and gently opened the jeep door. Among all the rangers at the reserve, Ethan was one whom Scout trusted. The young ranger could spend hours observing and following Scout, never once getting disturbed. Scout seemed to always recognize him, as if the memory of Ethan saving him previously lingered, causing him to treat the ranger in a unique way. Now, stepping out of the safety of his vehicle, Ethan hoped this past connection would work in his favor. As Ethan approached, Scout, the giant lion, looked at him carefully, assessing his trustworthiness. After what seemed like eternity, the lion finally stood and walked away nonchalantly. Ethan waited. He had gained Scout's approval, and he didn't want to jeopardize that by making hasty moves. Once the lion was a safe distance away, Ethan picked up the little child. With Scout around, the child was composed. However, as the lion walked away, the child began crying again. Ethan had no option but to comfort the boy while driving at a slow and prudent speed back to his station. His mind was filled with questions. Why was the boy left alone on the road? Ethan was also astonished by Scout's unexpected behavior. The fastest way to seek answers was to analyze the CCTV footage, hoping it could provide some insights. Upon checking the CCTV from the reserve's limits, Ethan caught sight of something that shattered his heart. A run-down old car appeared in the footage just outside the reserve. After squinting his eyes, Ethan could discern a young man driving the vehicle. After a few minutes, a young woman with a child in her arms emerged from the car. She hastily looked around before spotting a gap in the fence, through which she pushed her way. Setting the child on the dirt track where Ethan had found him, the woman retreated to the car, leaving the boy behind. Watching this act left Ethan dumbstruck and more puzzled than ever. The woman's tender gesture toward the boy indicated that she was compelled to abandon him. But why inside a reserve, where the child could be in harm's way? Was she under the impression that the security cameras were monitored round the clock and the child would be found immediately? Was it her assumption that there might be a ranger nearby who could come to the child's rescue? Ethan knew that he may never get answers to all his questions. He would, of course, do everything possible to locate the child's parents, but deep down, he felt that they were long gone. After reviewing the footage, Ethan prepared a meal for the little boy. The young one seemed to have regained composure, providing an opportune moment for the ranger to extract some details before he had to involve the authorities. The child, appearing scared, only revealed that his name was David. Ethan felt it was time to make some pretty tough calls. As he liaised with the officers, he watched David cautiously consume his meal, instigating a peculiar realization. Ethan had previously saved Scout when he was a small cub after losing his mother. Now, he has seen the same lion safeguarding a young child who happened to be deserted by his parents. An uncanny similarity had come full circle only with the lonesome reality that there would be no one to look after David once he leaves Ethan's supervision, unlike Scout who remained under his guidance. Ethan internally acknowledged that extreme hardships must have triggered the parents to abandon David. Neighbourhood inhabitants around the reserve lacked financial stability, and establishing the cost of child nurturing wasn't a difficult task for Ethan. His mind reeled back to the video footage showcasing the desperate attempts of the young woman and David in their search of his parents, leaving Ethan overwhelmed with gloom. Anticipating David's future after exiting the reserve painted a bleak picture. Upon the authorities' arrival, David found solace in some videos on Ethan's phone. After having a steady meal, the young lad sprang back to life, consistently gesturing towards the outdoors, yelling "lion" and imitating a roar, conversely amusing the young ranger. Ethan sought clarity about the child's future from the authorities, who responded that in the absence of any relatives willing to take custody of David, he would be sent to an orphanage with an aspiration of his adoption. Ethan couldn't stomach the thought of such a dramatic overhaul that the young child was subjected to. Without giving his decision a second thought, the youthful ranger offered to oversee the child's well-being, while authorities initiated the search for his kin. The move was unprecedented, as Ethan had zero experience in child supervision, but the little lad seized his affection, a feeling reminiscent of when he encountered Scout years ago. However, moments later, Ethan was met with unfortunate news. The search for David's family was fruitless, translating to his eventual relocation to an orphanage. Ethan felt a pang upon the sight of the young lad, who had adapted remarkably in such a short span. Just the previous day, David had accompanied Ethan for a drive witnessing the lions, expressing immense joy at the sight of the frolicking cubs. Through David's lenses, Ethan felt an enchanting connection with the reserve he so dearly cherished. Ethan was acutely aware that David would eventually question the circumstances of his abandonment in the future. No one could provide a concrete explanation, but there would always be someone to assure him of his parents' love. Ethan would tell him of the courageous lion that kept him safe. He would be that someone. Ethan was resolved. David wouldn't be sent to an orphanage. Instead, Ethan decided to adopt him. The following months proved challenging as Ethan navigated the complex procedure of adoption to legally become David's guardian. Finally, their journey led to a day out to observe the lions and commemorate the beginning of their fresh life phase together. As they enjoyed the warmth of the late evening sun, not far from where David was discovered initially was the Lion Scout. As their jeep passed slowly, the lion spotted a young child observing him from the vehicle. Scout casually lifted his head to examine the man who had saved his life, and now the life of a young boy. Ethan was brimming with eagerness to share Scout's incredible tale with his son when he was old enough to comprehend it. His journey led him to a unique family unit consisting of a rescued lion and child, and while it might not be a conventional setup, he wouldn't have chosen differently. So, what actions would you have taken if you were Ethan? We are interested in hearing your opinions, so don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch up in the next video.